Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being on. We'll get you back again, as have you, Julia Hartley-Moore.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the COVID roller coaster takes us on another loop. Just a day after Auckland drops alert levels, another Papatoetoe high school student, a casual plus contact, tests positive for the virus. Now hundreds of people are being retested, so did the school reopen too soon? We talked to students, the principal and the COVID response minister. Reports of crushing demand and excruciating wait times for mental health services. So is it still on the government's priority fix-it list? The Health Minister, Andrew Little, is live. Sky's profit is up, so why could you have to pay more to watch the ABs in action? And with a little perseverance, some remarkable video from the Red Planet.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Hundreds of school children at Papatoetoe High School have been retested for COVID-19 today after news broke of another student with the disease. She is the 9th person to test positive in the cluster, which triggered a level 3 lockdown in Auckland last week. The school is closed again for the foreseeable future after reopening yesterday. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the community will be feeling stressed and anxious. But he says retesting is crucial as the first student in the outbreak and today's case had not been at school together for nearly 2 weeks. Chris Hipkins is standing by a decision to allow Papatoetoe High School to reopen and says the risk remains low.
Positive test result meant that we could confirm them as a positive case, but the risk there is reasonably low because they had been away from school.
The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, and you can hear more of that interview soon on Checkpoint. Thousands of businesses have put their hand up for the government's latest support package since applications opened today. So far, 3,434 businesses have applied for a combined $10 million. The Resurgence Support Payment is eligible to those that have suffered a 30% drop in revenue over 7 days and was introduced to boost businesses when there is an increase in alert levels. Under the scheme, each eligible business will receive $1,500 plus $400 per employee, up to a total of 50 full-time employees. The applications will be considered overnight and are open for another month. The Director General of Health says he was not put under any pressure to open the Pullman Hotel prematurely after it was closed to investigate a COVID outbreak. A report into the outbreak from the Pullman says the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment told the Ministry of Health it needed to be back online by February the 15th because it had people with MIQ vouchers waiting. It reopened on the 16th, but with only the lower levels operating. Ashley Bloomfield says it was safe to do so.
There was no pressure brought to bear, and we had a good team of both public health and MB folk and local regional public health people involved in the assessment, and I gave very full advice through to my counterpart at MB on what would need to be in place before it was reopened.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield. The Prime Minister says there is much more to do to reduce child poverty in New Zealand. Latest figures shown all 9 measures of child poverty tracking downwards compared to 2 years ago, including material hardship rates. However, these do not account for the impact of COVID-19, and the data shows poverty rates for Māori and Pasifika children are higher across almost all measures. Jacinda Ardern says the government is making good progress, but she won't be satisfied until all children are lifted out of poverty. She says policies that will target those on the lowest incomes and in entrenched poverty will be next on the government's agenda. The Human Rights Commission has told the Supreme Court a mentally ill man jailed for 7 years for attempting to kiss a woman on a Wellington street should be released. Daniel Clinton Fitzgerald had been convicted twice before for similar offences, meaning the 3 strikes rule applied to the third conviction and therefore the maximum sentence for the crime. He is appealing the decision at the court. The Commission's lawyer Andrew Butler says Fitzgerald's sentence is grossly out of proportion to the crime.
avoiding the imposition of 7 years imprisonment on Mr. Fitzgerald will do no damage, no harm to the underlying purposes of the 2010 Amendment Act. Indeed, it will likely reduce the public contempt it might otherwise be held in. In this country, we like people to get a fair crack of the whip, not a whipping.
Andrew Butler from the Human Rights Commission. 28 pilot whales, which were found stranded at Farewell Spit this morning, are still swimming close to shore. The whales were first refloated last night, but were found restranded when rescuers returned at first light today. 10 whales were found dead. Project Jonah General Manager Darren Grover says the high tide about 8:30 tonight should help. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. The England bowlers have ripped through the White Ferns batting order in the first one-day international cricket match at Hagley Oval. New Zealand opener Hayley Jensen scored a quick-fire half-century to post her highest score, but she lacked support. Jensen was dismissed for 53 runs as New Zealand lost wickets at regular intervals against the world champions. A short time ago, the White Ferns were 160 for 8 off 40 overs, with debutant Brooke Halliday on 37 runs. Meanwhile, the Australian fast bowler Jai Richardson admits he was fortunate enough to bowl just one over against Devon Conway when he was in full flight in last night's opening men's T20 international in Christchurch. An unbeaten 99 from Conway guided the Black Caps to a 53-run win. Richardson says they should have taken the opportunity to capture Conway's wicket early.
Look, I mean, he's allowed to bat well, and he batted very, very well. So no doubt we'll reassess and have a look at him again. To see what we want to do in the death overs. But, yeah, look, credit to him. He batted fantastically.
The second T20 is in Dunedin on Thursday. Football fans will continue to be locked out of English Premier League games until the final round of the season. Under new rules from the British government for easing COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, up to 10,000 spectators could be allowed back for the final days of the Premier League season and for European Championship games. That's the news.
A government minister reprimands Rio Tinto.
The smelter I have found uncooperative. We've got problems up and down the country where irresponsible corporates have left behind poisoned, toxic waste.
Kelvin Davis is criticised by Amnesty International.
This is cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment, so I'm very concerned that the minister isn't taking this seriously.
And a tax setback for Donald Trump.
The Supreme Court has said that Donald Trump cannot keep his tax returns out of the hands of prosecutors.
Answers demanded. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and northern Gisborne. Mostly cloudy but fine breaks, a few showers developing this evening. Southern Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairatapa, fine weather. Waikato to Wellington including Tau, Maranui and Taihape, partly cloudy, isolated showers tomorrow north of Horowhenua. Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy period, scattered rain developing in western Nelson this evening and everywhere tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain south of the glacier spreading north tonight, heavy falls tomorrow, severe gale, northerlies in Fiordland easing tomorrow morning. For Canterbury, high cloud, gale norwesterlies for a time tomorrow, low cloud and a few showers south of Christchurch tomorrow night. Southland and Otago, high cloud with a few spots of rain, widespread rain in Southland overnight, then a few showers everywhere from tomorrow morning. And Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The COVID-19 roller coaster is doing another loop in Auckland tonight after a new community case of COVID-19 was identified this morning. The Ministry of Health says the Casual Plus contact, also a student at Papatoetoe High School, tested positive yesterday, 13 days after the original index case was last at school on February 10. And that means all 1,500 students plus teachers and some household contacts will all need to be tested again. In a few minutes, we'll hear from Papatoetoe High School Principal Vaughan Quio and the COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins. But first, this from our reporter Alice Stewart and camera operator Simon Rogers.
Deja vu at Papatoetoe High School this afternoon. Mobile testing units arriving just before 1 p.m. as news broke of another community case of COVID-19.
It's a casual plus contact of one of our original cases and also attends Papatoetoe High School. They had not returned to the school and they had been told to self-isolate at home and get tested for COVID-19.
COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins said today's new case, discovered 13 days after the index student was last at school, meant 1,500 students, teachers and some household contacts would need to be retested.
That'll help us to ensure that there aren't any additional cases and that the virus has been contained.
Papatoetoe High School was closed last week with students asked to remain at home until they returned a negative test result. The Director General of Health said officials were working with the family of the newest case, who had been tested at a community station yesterday after feeling unwell and losing their sense of taste and smell. He said the infected student had not returned to school this week.
The student lives in a household bubble of 6 people with a sibling who also attends Papatoetoe High but has also not been at school. Testing for all those other family members is currently underway with a mobile testing unit that's gone out.
But inside the classrooms this afternoon, emotions were running high as news of the new case broke and anxious students contacted their parents.
You know, you've got your children messaging you and, you know, they're worried. They're worried in there, they're anxious in there, so the kids are worried, you know, and so they, you know, who do they reach out to? To their parents. You know, their family members, their support group, you know. So, yeah, it's not easy.
My son is inside, he's freaking out, and I don't know what to do to get him out.
As testing got underway, Principal Vaughan Queo waited at the gate to reassure parents like Anna. Her child would not be tested for a second time without consent.
I was just angry. I thought, no, you're not going to test it without my consent, you know. You're going to have to get my consent, and so that's what it is. It's just about getting a parent's consent, you know, to do something to your child. You know, I know it's COVID, but come on, you know, don't lose sight that we are parents and we need to, you know, be there to support our children, you know, so that's just it.
Ashley Bloomfield acknowledged the stress the community would be feeling.
I recognise that this latest request for all the students and staff to be tested and also for the families of the school to stay isolated until we have the test results back will mean that they will be feeling some testing and isolation fatigue.
But he said retesting was crucial as the index student and today's student had not been at school together for nearly 2 weeks.
We want to be sure that there weren't some potential cases that may have been early on in an incubation period and who may have returned a negative test initially and be back at school, possibly asymptomatic. And so we need to just rule that out. A reminder too that all the close contacts who were the classmates of our original case and the teachers were all in isolation where they receive as close contacts a second test at day 12 before going back to school. And we had only one further case from that classroom, and none of our other testing of casual plus contacts identified any other cases.
Genome sequencing is underway, and Mr Bloomfield said 10 students who were also casual plus contacts were still being chased up and tested. There were also 5 more cases of COVID-19 in managed isolation today. For Checkpoint, Alice Stewart.
I asked COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins to clarify the status of Papatoetoe High School. Will it open again this week?
We're doing some further investigation about what we know about this new case, who they've been in contact with, what the extra risk may be. There's a whole wave of additional testing that's been happening today. So we just need a bit more information, but it's likely that closure will probably go on for a little longer than just today.
How long do you think?
Look, at this point, I wouldn't want to speculate on that. Obviously, how quickly the test completed, how quickly we get back the test results, that will have a bearing there. And also what more we learn about this particular case, whether there is risk that they could have, that there could have been other cases within the school connected with this one or our earlier cases that have previously been undetected. And we'll know a bit more about that as we get a bit more information from the case investigation.
Did you make a mistake opening the school so soon on Monday?
No, ultimately for students to go back to school, they had to produce evidence that they'd had a negative test. In this particular case, the student wasn't back at school because they'd not yet had their test. When they got their test, it showed that they were, whilst they had been reasonably asymptomatic and were only showing mild symptoms, then they still hadn't been at school. So the test showed that they, positive test result meant that we could confirm them as a positive case. But the risk there is reasonably low because they had been away from school.
But you told us that the risk was reasonably low for casual plus contacts, and that's what this latest positive case is. And also, they're on the outer limits of that 14-day incubation period from the point of exposure. So I'm wondering, have you tested a chunk of students too early in this?
No, all of the students in their first wave of testing were tested around day 5, so basically about 5 days after their exposure point, and they all came back negative. Now, we would have, given the casual nature of their contacts, had there been, significant spread within the school, we would have expected to see some evidence of that. So then our attention turned to the close contacts of the people who were more at risk, and they have been isolating. We're now looking again through the second sweep just to make sure that, there haven't been some students there that did come back with their negative sort of tests around day 5, who have subsequently been, incubating the virus and that, they may be positive now. So that's what the second sweep of testing will help us to eliminate the possibility, to rule out the possibility of.
So just to be clear, Minister, there are students who could potentially be still incubating COVID.
If they were, we'd certainly pick them with this sweep of testing that's underway now and that's been happening this afternoon.
Do you have any update for us? Any more tests back? Any locations of interest?
No, we're expecting the testing of the new cases' family members back later on today. We'll also expect back sometime this evening the genome sequence, which all things, going as expected, would link it back to the existing cases, but we'd have that confirmation or otherwise of that later on this evening.
How long are the testing station at the school? How long will it stay open?
I'm not sure how long they're staying open this afternoon, but if if there's still more people to be tested tomorrow, then they'll be back on site again tomorrow. So they'll be working with the school to make sure everyone can get tested. What we've said is that if you're a parent wanting to go and get tested, if you could get tested at the community-based testing station rather than going to the school, that would be helpful. It would mean that the students and staff at the school who we need to prioritise are the ones to be prioritised for testing there.
Why not leave that station open late tonight? Just get them done, get them through.
Oh, look, they may well be doing that. I just don't have the information in front of me.
You've got some angry, frustrated parents now because their kids have been tested, some of them twice already. How are you going to get their confidence back?
I think one of the realities of dealing with COVID-19 is that when we've talked about low risk, there's no such thing as no risk. And, when you deal with COVID-19 positive cases out in the community, it does mean that a number of people need to be tested to rule out the possibility of wider transmission. And sometimes that will, depending on the risk factors, they may need to be tested multiple times.
But did you take more of a risk than you should have with their children when you reopened the school on Monday?
No, not at all. Like I said, the key safeguard here is the fact that no one was allowed back at school without a negative COVID-19 test.
This latest case is from a household of 6. Are there any other children in that household? Do they go to other schools?
I haven't got all of that information. I think there are some siblings. I don't have the detailed breakdown of them. I know that all of their immediate family members who live with them have been tested and we're expecting those results back. Should any of those come back positive, then obviously we would do contact tracing for them, which would include looking at the parents' workplace, looking at, I think there is one other student who also goes to the same school, but I haven't got that confirmed. So all of that information will come back with the case investigation and the test results.
So potentially you may have other schools involved here. You can't rule that out.
Look, I just don't have that information. I can't rule that in either. I don't have the detailed information for all of those family members and the information that I've received so far, but I would expect to see more on that later on today.
Minister, I know you've got commitments, so very quickly, some of these families financially having to stay home is hurting them. How can they be helped?
So we've set up a dedicated 100 number that will connect them with the Ministry of Social Development and all of the different supports that are available to them. That number's been, we're not distributing that publicly, that number's been distributed within the school. So their first port of call should be to get in touch with MSD to make sure that they're accessing the financial supports available. There is quite a lot of support out there that's available, and so I'd encourage them to make sure they're pursuing that.
And that is the COVID response Minister Chris Hipkins there. Well, joining me now is Papatoetoe High School Principal Vaughan Queo. How are you doing, Vaughan?
Kia ora. I'm doing okay. I've got a fabulous team and we're all doing an extra little bit of work today over and above what we were expecting to do.
Absolutely. Now, have you heard whether there's going to be any update further tonight, any other tests being returned this afternoon?
Oh, so I can tell you the testing centre this afternoon, which sort of got rolling from about 2 o'clock, has done over 700 tests of our students and staff so far, which is probably well over half of what they needed to do. There's still a few students voluntarily waiting in the queue for their turn, and then we reopen the testing centre tomorrow at 8 o'clock. So school is closed tomorrow at this point, so that the testing centre stuff can carry on and we can get everyone tested that we need to.
The Minister indicated that potentially there were some tests that were taken earlier that could be due back this evening. Have you had an update on those?
I have not had an update on those.
Okay. What's your feeling about whether the school should open later this week?
If I was a gambling man, my money would be on Monday. But I don't have an opinion, but I can tell you it would be far cleaner and easier for me and my community if Monday was the first day back.
So what are you telling your families at the moment then?
So I'm telling families at the moment that school is closed until further notice. When people are asking me directly, as you just did, I'm telling them what my opinion would be. But at this stage where we haven't had an indication of how long we will be closed, I am making the assumption that it's based on how quickly we get through the testing.
We were out at the school today. Some parents raised issues about consent with retesting.
Yeah.
How are you handling that?
Yeah, so no, at that time when they raised those concerns about testing, the testing station hadn't been set up. And so no one was required to or not give consent at that point. And of course, we're not going to make anyone do anything. So students of high school age are able to give consent themselves in terms of what I believe is lawful, according to the information that I have at the moment.
So what, 13 onwards, Vaughan? 13 up?
No, I don't think there's an age on it. I think it's
Right.
even younger than that. But certainly high school age students, sort of my body, my rules type thing. But if there was a student that said, I don't want to have a test unless I've spoken with mum, they were able to not have a test. No one forced anybody to do anything. And most of those students are the younger students at school anyway, and we haven't got to there yet. We started with the senior school and we're working our way down. And so any students that still need to get a test and need support of parents or consent from parents as well, or want consent from parents as well, are free to come back tomorrow and do that, or go to their local GP tomorrow with the code that we've provided on our Facebook page that will prioritise their tests. So no one was instructed to test. It's all voluntary, and the students are of age where they can give that consent themselves if they wish.
This latest positive case is what they call a casual plus contact. So what can you tell us about the level of contact that this student may have had with the other 3 students? If they don't share a class, how have they crossed paths? Do you know?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? So that was when I got informed of the new case this morning. There's a couple of us on site who are aware of who the students are, of course, because you need to be able to print out class lists and bits and pieces. My gut reaction was, how do they link together? And so there's no obvious link to me from a schooling perspective. And add to that the students from today, or student from today, I should say, hasn't been at school. Wasn't at school all of last week, hasn't returned to school this week. So I don't know how that contact link or that epidemiological link has been made. I'll leave that to the track and trace experts.
So, can you remember a date when all of these students were at school at the same time, whether or not they're in the same class or mixing and mingling, but the last time these students would have been at school together is when?
The week before, so the...
Friday before Valentine's Day?
The week finishing the 12th, yes. And that was a pre-infectious period. according to case A, the case A and B.
So it's a complete mystery as far as you're concerned at the moment.
Complete mystery. Yeah, so there's only one day of school, that is the 10th of February, where a student has been on-site and infectious, and that was the first case that we all heard about weeks ago.
So student A.
Everyone else is student A, call it student A. I think it's case B, but call it student A. Complete mystery at this point. I think my assumption would be there's some contact off the grounds between some people that we've got to get to the bottom of, but I can't be sure.
Do you mean after people were told to stay home, or in between?
Either, not sure. Could be a long incubation period. It could be I've got nothing. So there's nothing that jumps out and hits us that says this is a possible link between these two people.
Okay. And I mean, I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, but were you all on board with the school opening on Monday? Were you happy with that?
Oh, yeah. So I was really comfortable with the... absolutely, is the bottom line. We were really comfortable that those students who we didn't have a negative result for weren't here, and they weren't. So the student that has tested positive today hasn't been here, has been following the rules, has been off-site. And I think the testing today is super precautionary to make sure it's not a completely left field case that can't be linked to the 2 cases we've had already, or 3 cases we've had already. So this is a really conservative approach that's being taken. I don't think we can draw any conclusions, can draw any conclusions from why we're all getting tested again. I think it's more, let's do that go hard, go early thing, and if we've tested more people than we need to, that's better than testing too few, right?
So today at the press conference it was mentioned that there were 11 students that hadn't been tested at all, and there were issues around getting those kids tested. Is there any particular problem there in terms of do they not want to be tested?
There's a combination of things. Some of it is about actively choosing not to be, but there's a number of reasons that people won't have been tested. But I'm not privy to what they all are, because that work is done by the contact tracing team. There's some follow-up support from our staff here at school, but that's more about cajoling and motivating people to test rather than asking for an explanation why they're not.
But as far as you understand it, Vaughan, there are some among that 11 who simply do not want to be tested.
Yes, that's as far as I understand it, yes. There are some people who've made the conscious decision to not be tested, and they would rather self-isolate for 14 days than to test, yes.
And are they allowed to come back to the school if they don't return a negative test, even if it is after 14 days?
That is the public health advice. If there's 14 days, no symptoms, no nothing, and no contact with any other humans, then prior to today, they were able to return to school. The update of information around that will come to light tomorrow.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is the Papatoetoe High School Principal, Vaughan Queo there. It is almost 27 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the programme, Sky makes a blinder of a profit, so why could you have to pay more to watch the ABs? And we've got a quick traffic update. There's been a serious crash on State Highway 29 on the Lower Kaimais between State Highway 28 and Puripuri Road, and the road is closed. The Transport Agent says there is a very long detour in place. There's also been a serious crash in Whakatane, and a section of State Highway 30 is closed between Paroa Road and Kepa Road. Waka Kotahi says there's a detour in place and motorists should allow extra time. A health professional who's been on the front line of the mental health crisis in this country says the sector is chronically underfunded and fears dire consequences if it continues. Tonight we have a behind-the-scenes look at the very real challenges facing mental health professionals desperately trying to deal with growing demands. Dr. Martinez Becker left his job as a clinical psychologist at Auckland DHB Kari Centre this month. He says staff burnt out and growing wait lists are major issues that need immediate action. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge.
Dr. Becker spent 6 years helping a skyrocketing number of at-risk young Aucklanders.
mental health services are doing more with less. We were getting often month on month more referrals than we'd ever had before, yet the amount of clinicians to see those stayed the same.
Dr. Becker says the resourcing and burnout issues faced by him and his colleagues are not exclusive to his former workplace. He says these are the realities of public mental health services across the country. Dr. Becker left the Auckland DHB earlier this month. He had been in a specialist team helping young people who were self-harming and suicidal. Before leaving, he surveyed his colleagues using a scale known as the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory.
An inventory that looks at managing what our burnout is personally in our work and with our clients. And 3/4 of my colleagues scored above a high cutoff for burnout.
Dr. Becker says mental health professionals are stretched paper thin. He and his colleagues used to run a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week line to help chronically suicidal or self-harming young people use skills to deal with their emotions.
To run a on-call service like that, you need a substantial amount of staff to do that. And that has been more challenging. In the last couple of years, we have lost staff in that team and got to the point where we had to actually put a halt on the phone altogether, so not offer that service because we didn't have enough people to be on that roster.
Dr. Becker says getting help for young people struggling with mental health difficulties has become increasingly difficult. He says accessing public mental health services depends on the severity of a mental difficulty. DHB-run services, he says, are only funded to deal with moderate to severe difficulties. Other services like Fresh Minds and school guidance counsellors are left to care for young people who don't meet that threshold.
Getting into public services has gotten to the point where at times our wait list has been in excess of 4 to 5 months. So these are young people that have at least kind of on a quick overlook of the case been thought to likely meet our criteria.
That's young people dealing with heightened mental difficulties waiting nearly half a year to access public mental health services. At any one time, the wait lists for services would consist of well over 100 young people.
So these are often young people with significant anxiety, significant depression that is impacting on their lives in various ways and quite often risk to themselves as well.
Dr. Becker says that often pushes people to seek private care, but it can be expensive, sometimes costing as much as $180 to $225 an hour. Again, he says the issues are nationwide, not isolated to his former workplace. He wanted to emphasise all of his colleagues were amazing professionals, but his insights are no surprise to Mental Health Foundation Chief Executive Sean Robinson. He says Budget 2019's headline-grabbing $1.9 billion for a mental health package had in reality made no difference for those working on the front line.
Nothing has got better on the ground for them. Turnover of staff and burnout of staff is enormous. We are hearing reports of people, being in cots in offices, because there's no space on wards. The situation is absolutely dire and remains in crisis.
Sean Robinson's accused the government of being too slow to implement 38 He Ara Oranga mental health inquiry recommendations released in 2018. 2 years on, he says there's no plan for how those recommendations will be put into practice. He says the Ministry of Health has also stopped reporting on the state of mental health services in New Zealand, meaning there's no monitoring of what's on offer and how effective these services are. Meanwhile, Dr. Becker says if the country's mental health services remain under-resourced, more clinicians will move to private practice, making public services harder to access. He fears if the underfunding continues, there could be far more serious results. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And we've just had a statement through from Auckland DHB. It says the Kari Centre DBT phone line was temporarily paused but is now back up and running again. It says a mental health crisis line has been continually running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Co-Director of Mental Health and Addictions, Tracy Silva-Garay, says the safety and well-being of staff and the people they care for is the highest priority. She says we take our obligation to them very seriously. She says as a result of the COVID-19 lockdown period, some people have been waiting longer for mental health care appointments than the DHB or those people would like. The Kari Centre team has been working hard to reduce wait times. She says they've been adopting new ways of working, such as telehealth, which has been helping to make services more accessible for people as well as reduce wait times. They are also in the process of recruiting 13 new staff to work at the Kari Centre. Now, we're keen for your feedback. What's your experience with mental health services? Is someone in your family waiting in the queue for help, or do you work in the sector? We would love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Health Minister Andrew Little joins us live to talk mental health. A mentally ill man jailed for 7 years for attempting to kiss a woman on a Wellington street challenges the 3 strikes law. And we flush out details of the Pullman Hotel loos and whether they are a COVID infection risk. First though, here's Susanna with the 5:35 headlines.
More than 700 at Papatoetoe High School students have been retested for COVID-19 today after another student tested positive. It brings to 9 the number in the cluster that triggered Auckland's Level 3 lockdown last week. The Director General of Health says retesting is crucial because the first student in the outbreak and today's case had not been at school together for nearly 2 weeks. Papatoetoe High School has shut again after reopening only yesterday. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says the risk remains low. He says reopening will depend on how soon all students, staff and household contacts have been retested. Thousands of businesses have applied for a total of $10 million under the government's latest support scheme. The resurgence support payment is available to firms that can show a 30% drop in revenue over 7 days due to last week's lockdown. Each eligible business will get $1,500 plus $400 for each employee, capped at 50 full-time workers. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he was not pressured to reopen Auckland's Pullman Hotel before it was safe. A report into January's outbreak at the facility shows MB set a date for it to reopen despite the COVID investigation because of people with MIQ vouchers waiting. It reopened on the 16th, but only at lower levels, and Dr Bloomfield says it was safe to do so. The Human Rights Commission has told the Supreme Court a mentally ill man jailed for 7 years for trying to kiss a woman in the street should be released. It was Daniel Clinton Fitzgerald's third conviction, meaning the court was required to apply the maximum sentence under the 3 strikes rule. Appealing the sentence, the Commission's lawyer said it is grossly out of proportion to the crime. Facebook will end its ban on news sites in Australia after it reached agreement with the government involving changes to proposed media laws. It follows a backlash to Facebook's response to the laws, which would force tech giants to pay news outlets for their content. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to Nicholas Poynter now with business news. He's in our Wellington studio today. Nicholas, do you want to give us a quick whip around of today's earnings?
Yeah, an absolute deluge of company earnings result came through today. Too many to mention, in fact, so I'll just touch on some of the standouts. Among them was the rural supplies company PGG Wrightson. Now, their business really caters to the agriculture sector, and it's crediting that strong performance of the agriculture sector in light of the pandemic, with really lifting its half-year profit by about 40% from $12 to $18 million. You know, I think what they're referring referring to there is strong export prices for various horticultural products, and also some of the revisions we've seen recently in sort of farm gate milk price payouts on the back of a strong overseas prices. Now, the company's revenue, that was also up by about 6% to a whisker under $500 million, as it recorded really strong sales growth across its retail, livestock and real estate business. And on that last point, it says it's recorded the strongest period of rural property sales in the past 6 years. And they're not the only company to really benefit from a strong housing market. There's also the likes of the retirement village operator Somerset, whose full-year profit is up by a third on last year as the value of its property portfolio increased by $220 million. It had initially forecast that the value of its portfolio would actually fall by about 10%. So a real turnaround there that we've seen in the housing market. Revenue for the company, that was up as it's really indirectly benefited from the pandemic, as what it has to offer customers in terms of safety, a community within its villages and security, that's really resonated with a lot of older people who felt isolated coming out of the first lockdown and look to take up what the company has to offer. And finally, there's the renewable power company Mercury. It's managed to lift its half-year profit on the back of an asset sale. But why I think they're probably worth mentioning is that they say a dry spell of weather at its Taupo hydro catchment will actually lead to a fall in generation. And the flow-on effects for consumers like you and I is probably higher prices. So that's something to definitely keep in mind later in the year when you're checking a power bill. So maybe not be too surprised if you see a bit of an increase there on your bill.
And what about retail spending numbers? They have, eased over the end of last year?
Yeah, data out from Stats NZ shows retail sales volume. So this is seasonally adjusted and excludes some of the price moves. That shows that volumes are down by about 2.7% over the 3 months to December. And the fall itself, that shouldn't really come as too much of a surprise because sales volumes were up an unbelievable 28% in the September quarter, as when lockdown conditions eased, New Zealanders rushed out to spend. So it was going to be very difficult for the sales numbers in this period to continue to grow after such a strong surge, which is why market consensus amongst economists was a fall of about 0.5% over the period. Now, this 2.7% fall is a little bit weaker than that, but that's maybe due to, big falls in spending in the accommodation and hospitality sectors, and that's maybe a reflection of the fact that we do not have many overseas, we don't have any overseas tourists coming into this country. And just one of the banks who put out a commentary on this today, they noted that today's numbers are really broadly in line with their view that the economy will likely shrink by about 0.5% over this quarter. But it's important to note that economists, while we probably pay more attention than ever to them at the moment during this pandemic, their job has probably never been harder. A number of their measures or their predictions over the past 12 months have been way off. GDP numbers and labour market numbers showing a lot more strength and a lot more upside than was forecast. So we do have to keep an eye on these GDP numbers over the next quarter. It wouldn't be too much of a surprise as that real strong growth we're seeing and strong activity we're seeing in the construction sector, if that lead the economy over the final quarter to actually grow.
And what about market numbers?
So the NZX was down by about 37 points to 12,381. The dollar is at 71.3 US cents, 92.5 Australian. And on the markets at the moment, you can imagine that a lot of investors are really biding their time, waiting for the RBNZ to put out that monetary policy statement, the first one of the year, where it talks about sort of its plans for over the past few months and how it feels like the economy's been doing.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news, joining us from Wellington today. Sky TV is warning it may cost more to watch sport on its platforms because of a more expensive rugby rights deal. But the company is promising subscription fees won't change this financial year. Sky TV has more than trebled its net profit to just under $40 million for the 6 months to December. CEO Sophie Maloney told our producer Annabelle Reid the company has some big costs in the next half of the year.
Whilst it's a very strong first half year, we are really focused on what matters most, and that's obviously continuing to deliver amazing content to all of our customers throughout New Zealand, whether they've got a Skybox in the home or they want to consume via one of our apps, Neon or Sky Sport Now. So, as I say, that the reason it's good, but we need to do better, is that we recognise we have some more significant costs in our programming rights line the second half of the financial year. So we're resolutely focused on stabilising our revenues and, of course, looking to focus on that cost line as well.
Just on those increasing costs, I understand that is going to affect the rugby rights. So what impact will that have on customers?
So at this stage, no impact on our customers. We've got our new Sanzara New Zealand Rugby deal kicking in from 1 January. And look, we're very excited about Sky Super Rugby Aotearoa kicking off the weekend. So no change for our customers at this juncture, and certainly not in this financial year.
Do you anticipate there being an increase in subscription fees maybe in the back half of the year?
What I'm really keen to do is that we look at the overall value for money offering for our customers. And in that context, being very conscious of the overall envelopes that New Zealand households have to spend on content, I think we will need to have a very good look at the sports rights package, just given this uplift in cost, but certainly won't impact this financial year. And we'll only look to engage in that once we've done that fuller review, because we're absolutely conscious that we do need to do right by our customers and make sure we're delivering to them the right value.
Are you looking into improving the offering or tailoring the offering better for your customers? So if you are just wanting to watch the rugby, you just pay to watch the rugby?
Do you know what? It's a great question, and it's absolutely part of the research that we're doing to really understand what is it that our customers want to watch. And some of the interesting feedback we're getting is when you do offer up different parcels of content and different packages, actually customers then do come back to wanting to keep the bundle. But to that point, that's absolutely part of what we're looking into with this value for money work stream, is how do we make it work? And of course, right now, if you just want Sky Sport via an app, then we've got that for you in Sky Sport Now.
Are you getting feedback from customers who have the Skybox that there's a lot of channels that they just don't watch and don't want to pay for?
Yeah, look, that's absolutely part of the feedback. And I think what's interesting about what streaming services like Netflix can do is there's a lot of content there that you probably don't want to watch, but they surface a smaller amount, so you feel like it is good value for money. And part of what we want to be doing in terms of giving value back to our customers is investing in a new Skybox that will enable us to not only surface content in the right way, but enable us to actually lean into that conversation around packages so that we can actually deliver up content for our customers in ways that work for them, perhaps better than the current set-top box enables.
And what sort of timeline have you put on looking at whether you can tailor packages better for customers?
For me, it's this calendar year. There's been a lot of mahi, a lot of hard work by the team to date, and you know what? We've had that feedback from customers, and now's the time for us to act.
And that was Sky TV CEO Sophie Maloney speaking to Annabelle Reid. A quick update from across the Tasman now. Facebook has told the Australian government it's ending its ban on Australian news after amendments to proposed media laws. Currently, Facebook users in Australia are blocked from seeing Australian news items. Under the ban, Australian health departments and charity groups were also blocked by mistake. It was in response to new media laws that would force Facebook to pay news publishers for the right to display their content. But the standoff has now come to an end after almost a week. The Australian government has made changes to the new law, giving Facebook more time and leeway to broker agreements with news publishers. It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And after 6, we'll speak to the Health Minister Andrew Little about how the government plans to deal with the mental health crisis. A lot of you getting in touch about that in feedback, so get in touch too if you have something to say or have a question for the Minister. Text us on 2101. Airborne COVID particles from bowel movements may have contributed to Auckland's Pullman hotel outbreak. Guests caught the virus from each other in the hotel last month, sparking a small community outbreak and widespread testing in Auckland and Northland. A Ministry of Health report into the outbreak says ventilation may have contributed, including from the toilets. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The report raises concerns about how a simple toilet stop may be helping to spread COVID-19 in MIQ. It says some airborne virus may be generated when those infected with COVID-19 have a bowel movement. The Pullman's bathrooms are being checked to see if they meet fresh air standards. The COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, delicately sidestepped the loo factor when asked today, saying it was part of a wider review of ventilation at the hotel.
We won't fill the place up completely until we're absolutely certain that any remaining issues have been dealt with there. If we need to put more work into the air quality systems there, we will.
The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says it's very unlikely the virus was transmitted via the bathroom fan.
It's not uncommon for these sorts of viruses to be shed in faecal matter, but it's not, in this case and in other cases, a route of infection. I haven't seen any evidence around that.
But infectious diseases expert David Murdoch says though the risk is likely to be minimal, it's the right call to investigate. That's because COVID's such a new disease, every possible means of transmission should be considered when there's no known source of an outbreak.
We focus on respiratory secretions, and that undoubtedly is the main means of transmission. But just exactly how much risk it could be from spread through the gut is likely to be less, but it's unknown.
The report does say it may never know how the outbreak happened, and there could be multiple factors that contributed. Mr Hipkins says most of the suggestions about how to improve airflow are already in place, including the lifts, which hadn't been fixed when the report was written.
The potential for stagnant air to remain in a lift for a longer period of time is something that we are taking steps to reduce by the installation of HEPA filters on the lift air conditioning systems.
The report also reveals the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment told the Ministry of Health it wanted the hotel back in action by February the 15th, despite it being closed for the investigation. It says it needed the space for those who are waiting to come into the country with MIQ vouchers. Dr Bloomfield insists the hotel was not reopened prematurely.
There was no pressure brought to bear, and we had a good team of both public health and MB folk and local regional public health people involved in the assessment, and I gave very full advice through to my counterpart at MB on what would need to be in place before it was reopened.
And Mr Hipkins says they could have managed without it.
It would be tight. We could cope with the Pullman being offline for a bit longer if we'd needed to. Obviously, it's easier for us to be using some of the Pullman, and at the moment we've made the decision to use the lower levels.
The report says human behaviour is likely to have played a part in the outbreak, including people being out of their rooms unnecessarily or unsupervised. Guests must now book breaks, and Mr Hipkins says improvements to the airflow will be rolled out nationwide. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
A number of you have been getting in touch about our mental health services in this country. This listener says there's a 12-month wait list in Taranaki for child and adolescent mental health services. Another listener's got in touch to say they work as an emergency physician in a large New Zealand emergency department. They go on to say the mental health services in this country are simply a disgrace. Almost every shift I work, there are multiple patients who have been referred for acute mental health review who wait 8, 9, 10 hours to be seen. The mental health teams are wonderful people, but they are simply stretched too thin. After 6, we speak to Andrew Little, the Health Minister. A mentally ill man jailed for 7 years for attempting to kiss a woman on a Wellington street is challenging the decision in the Supreme Court. Daniel Clinton Fitzgerald, who is a schizophrenic, was sentenced in 2018 for the assault. He had been convicted twice before for assaulting women on the street, and the third conviction invoked the 3 strikes rule under the Sentencing Act, and therefore the maximum sentence for the crime. Eva Corlett was at the Supreme Court today.
In 2016, Daniel Fitzgerald grabbed a woman on Cuba Street and tried to kiss her. She managed to turn her head and he got her cheek. He then had an altercation with her friend who stepped in to help. Under the 3 strikes law brought in under the previous national government, he was sentenced to 7 years. Previous judges have called the sentence grossly disproportionate to the gravity of the offence, but they said they were reluctantly bound by the law. The Human Rights Commission was at the Supreme Court as an intervener, there to offer greater perspective on the issues. Its lawyer Andrew Butler told the court the Commission supports Fitzgerald's appeal and cited the Bill of Rights Act.
Avoiding the imposition of 7 years imprisonment on Mr. Fitzgerald will do no damage, no harm to the underlying purposes of the 2010 Amendment Act. Indeed, it will likely reduce the public contempt it might otherwise be held in. In this country, we like people to get a fair crack of the whip, not a whipping.
Fitzgerald first became known to mental health services aged 15. He has remained on the radar ever since and has a long history of offending. Most of these offences sit at the lighter end of indecent assault, including his 3rd conviction. Psychologists say while he has some ability to determine right from wrong, his ability to fully comprehend the 3 strikes rules would have been limited. Butler urged the court to immediately release Fitzgerald.
Mr. Fitzgerald should not stay a minute more in prison. He needs help that he is not getting, it would appear, in his current environment.
Andrew Butler said while the offence was awful for the victims, it didn't qualify as serious violent offending. Outside the court, Fitzgerald's lawyer, Kevin Preston, said he should never have been subject to the 3 strikes rule because the courts could have chosen not to convict.
Taking into account the gross disproportionality, the breach of his human rights under Section 9 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights, that the court should interpret the legislation to give effect to that, discharge him out of conviction, get him out of prison, get him the help he needs for his mental health problems.
Mr. Preston says the lower courts were wrong to interpret the law the way they did. Fitzgerald has already served 4 years of his sentence, and Mr. Preston says that's taken a toll.
Unfortunately, and the psychiatrist confirmed his mental health deteriorated, and I'm afraid to say he presents now as rather docile, and it's very, very sad.
Madeleine Larissy for the Crown argued that the law is clear.
The maximum sentence must be imposed. There is no exception there, and nor is there any sort of qualifying proviso to it in the nature of the manifest injustice safety valve.
In 2018, Labour's plan to repeal the law was derailed by its coalition partner New Zealand First, who weren't prepared to offer their support. Now Labour has doubled down on its party's commitment to getting rid of the law, which it says is leading to absurd results. I te kōti mana nui mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko iwa kōle tēnei.
It's been another hot, dry summer for Auckland, and for those on tank water, it's been drying up quickly. Watercare has rolled out a new mobile filling station to help fill the gap, while people wait for more decent rainfall. As our reporter Louise Tanuth and cameraman Nick Monroe found out, Watercare is using a bit of Kiwi ingenuity, powered by the sun.
It lives in a self-contained box loaded on a trailer and is answering the call of those with dwindling tanks around Tamaki Makaurau. The box connects up to a fire hydrant under the ground and can pump water into tanks or trucks that need to be refilled. There are 3 of them around the city, one in Albany, another in Waikato, and this one in Huapai. Watercare Operations Controller Rohan Bhatti is one of the key creators. He says after huge demand at the other 11 permanent stations, they decided to try something different. And since December, the mobile station has been a huge hit.
This station has been very popular among the tanker drivers. We have seen demand as high as 500,000 litres in a day.
The main game changer, it's on wheels and saving money.
The beauty of this is that this can be deployed anywhere where the Watercare network exists, and we can see where the demand is and high usage. And we can deploy this, for example, in Albany or as such in Huapai. It's self-contained, it uses solar power and backup batteries.
Here at Watercare's mobile filling station in Huapai, drivers can come in and get their tanks filled up. It takes around 6.5 minutes for the average tank, which is around 10,000 litres, and they say it's saving them time on the road so they can fit in more jobs. Previously, for tanker drivers in this area, they'd have to drive to the Westgate tanker filling station for the Muriwai and Helensville area, but for contact drivers like Ben Mavoy at Water HQ, now it's a much faster trip.
So much so that probably we could safely say it's probably saving us 3 jobs a day extra that we can do by having this here.
Today he's filling up 11,000 litres and heading locally to Kumeu. Tim Sherling is the Northern Networks Operations Manager at Watercare. He explains how it all works.
So this is where it all starts. So we can connect to any hydrant on our network. AA graded water comes through, round to this side here. So within this side of the trailer, we've got a backflow and a strainer which protects our network. Comes through. We've actually got 2 trains that can be run. We've got a flow meter which records the usage, and then we've got a control valve. So control valve opens and closes when the tanker operator presses stop or go.
And if you're wondering, yes, it's solar powered, but there's a spare battery pack to rely on when it's overcast or rainy. After drivers have connected their pipes to the unit, the rest is taken care of.
So all the tanker operators have a dongle like this one. It's as simple as touching on, hitting the start button, watching the digital display, and when they're done, they hit stop and off they go.
The data is then sent to the billing team in Newmarket via a 4G SIM card to charge for water usage. This mobile filling station will stay in Huapai for the time being. Then Watercare says the demand will determine where it's heading next. Moti Hōtaka, Oti Yahiahi, ko Louise te Nuth, aho.
And some more of your feedback now on mental health services. This listener says the concerns raised are absolutely true. This is not a criticism, but a reality. Another listener has got in touch to say, I work in mental health secondary services. I can absolutely confirm that Southern DHB mental health services are completely inadequate and in critical condition. Another person says our experience is consistent with the report on your program, months for an appointment and then cancelled. But Hamish has got in touch to say, my son is a client of Papatoetoe. My experience is one of 100% wraparound care, world-leading counsellors and a high level of staff coordination. I can't rate them highly enough and have helped my son deal with his condition and get on with living his life with bipolar. Someone on the price to watch the All Blacks, they say he couldn't pay me enough to watch the All Blacks. Sky would have to pay me.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Hundreds of school children at Papatoetoe High School have been retested for COVID-19 today after another student tested positive for the disease. She is the 9th person to test positive in the cluster, which triggered a level 3 lockdown in Auckland last week. Principal Vaughan Quio says more than 700 tests have been carried out at the school today. Mr Quio has told Checkpoint the centre will open again tomorrow from 8 o'clock. He says students are now being forced to get a test.
If there was a student that said, I don't want to have a test unless I've spoken with mum, they were able to not have a test. No one forced anybody to do anything. And most of those students are the younger students at school anyway, and we haven't got to them yet. We started with the senior school and we're working our way down.
The school is closed again for the foreseeable future after reopening yesterday. Thousands of business owners have put their hand up for the government's latest support package since applications opened today. The Resurgence Support Payment, which is for any company which has suffered a 30% drop in revenue over 7 days, was brought in to help businesses affected by an increase in alert levels. Amy Williams reports.
In one day, 3,434 businesses have applied for a combined total of $10 million under the scheme. Each eligible firm will receive $1,500 plus $400 per employee, up to a total of 50 full-time workers. Inland Revenue is administering the payment and says the applications will be considered overnight. Companies can apply for the support payment for one more month. Ko Amy Williams, tēnei.
Facebook and Australia have agreed to end their standoff over Australian news content being banned on the social media platform. The ban, enforced by Facebook last week, came in response to proposed new media laws. World Watch's Max Toll has more.
In a bill expected to be passed by the Australian Senate within days, social media platforms were to be forced to pay Australian news publishers for the right to show their content. Facebook decided to block Australian news rather than comply. Now, the Australian government says it has made some amendments to the bill, which Facebook says it's happy with. A key amendment gives social media platforms more leeway in how they negotiate with publishers. The Australian Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has spoken several times with Facebook's boss Mark Zuckerberg in the past few weeks. This is Max Toll.
A pamphlet found at Spring Hill Jail encouraging protest to improve prisoners' living conditions has been referred to the police. Produced by People Against Prisons Aotearoa, it advocates peaceful protest but then refers to January's Waikeria riot. It says while it could be seen as extreme that inmates gave up on the complaint system and torched the unit instead, they succeeded where everyone else has failed. Corrections Minister Calvin Davis says it shouldn't be distributed around a prison.
Really inappropriate, and my concern is actually for the safety of corrections officers and corrections staff. If people are being encouraged to create disorder in prisons, that's entirely unacceptable.
The pamphlet also quotes Māori Party co-leader Rawari Waititi saying when injustice becomes law, defiance becomes duty. A man who's accusing a prominent businessman of indecently assaulting him says a mutual friend tried to bribe him with $15,000 to drop the allegation. The accused, a well-known man who has name suppression, is charged with 3 counts of indecent assault and 2 of perverting the course of justice. After the alleged assault and the man's complaint to police, the mutual friend met with him.
He started almost like talking in riddles or he was talking in code. I thought, okay, well, I think he might be trying to convince me to change my story. My intuition was like, you need to record this conversation because something's going to happen.
The complainant, whose voice has been disguised, says later in the recording the man slid him a cheque he could cash if he dropped the allegation. The skipper of a yacht who put out a mayday call last week has been found to have failed to cancel the call after reaching calmer seas. The yacht Tribe made a distress call on Wednesday evening off the east coast of the Coromandel Peninsula, sparking a major search. Maritime New Zealand says the skipper radioed that his yacht was taking on water and sinking. He reached calmer seas after several hours but didn't realise he needed to cancel the mayday. The yacht was eventually discovered in Bream Bay a few miles out of Whangarei. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The White Ferns have posted a total of 179 for England to chase in the first one-day international cricket match in Christchurch. Brooke Halliday and Hayley Jensen both scored half-centuries in the New Zealand innings, which ended in the 46th over. England's batting innings has just started. Meanwhile, Black Caps all-rounder Jimmy Neesham says the pandemic has brought cricketers closer together, but traditional rivalries still stand. The Australian cricket team are in New Zealand for 5 T20 games, and both teams travelled together to Dunedin today after playing the series opener in Christchurch last night. New Zealand are 1-0 up in the series, and Neesham says they want more wins.
It's never a friendly game with the Australians. Both teams want to win quite badly, and there's obviously a few guys who played together in the IPL and over in England and those sorts of places as well, so there's that friendly rivalry.
The next T20 is in Dunedin on Thursday. The incumbent All Blacks captain Sam Cane will share the captaincy duties for the Chiefs Super Rugby side this season with halfback Brad Weber. Cane says he discussed with the Chiefs coach Clayton McMillan the possibility of not leading the team during Super Rugby Aotearoa, but decided it was better to still be involved.
It gives me a chance to stay sharp with my leadership skills and get used to the responsibilities of being a captain full-time rather than not having those duties here and then having to get used to them again at the next level. So I feel it's better just to stay sharp and keep learning and practicing.
Super Rugby Aotearoa starts on Friday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples the latest Canadian chamber pop of The Weather Station. There's also the peck and post-punk of Goat Girls. Mihi Narangi Forbes and William Ray continue the story of the Waikato War. Tonight, the opening battles of that nation-shaping conflict. And former Cantabrian Eric Crampton on 10 years of the Christchurch rebuild. What have we learned? What would we prefer to forget? On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and northern Gisborne. Mostly cloudy with fine breaks. A few showers developing tonight. Southern Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine. Waikato to Wellington, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Partly cloudy, isolated showers tomorrow north of Horowhenua. Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy period. Scattered rain developing in western Nelson this evening and everywhere tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain south of the glaciers spreading north this evening. Heavy falls tomorrow. Severe gale northerlies in Fiordland easing tomorrow morning. Canterbury, high cloud with gale norwesterlies for a time tomorrow. Low cloud and a few showers south of Christchurch tomorrow night. Southland and Otago, high cloud with a few spots of rain. Widespread rain in Southland overnight, then a few showers everywhere from tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government is being urged to pump money and resources into mental health services to counter what one medical professional has described as chronic underfunding. Some young people are waiting more than 4 months to be seen by a mental health specialist in the public system. Tonight, Checkpoint has also heard from a clinical psychologist who's been working on the front line and says staff burnout is a major problem. The Health Minister, Andrew Little, joins me now. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
So $1.9 billion, that's the headline figure being pumped into mental health. Some people that we've been speaking to say nothing's got better on the front line. Excruciating wait lists, huge stress, understaffing. Are you talking directly to these people about their experiences?
Yes, I am, on a regular basis, and the message I'm getting is actually things are improving, and we know that from the additional services that have been funded and rolled out. So in the access and choice stuff, which is the counselling available for mild to moderate health conditions, available through GPs and community health care. We know that there are literally thousands of people who've had the benefit of that service in the last 18 months. We have a 4-year program that we're rolling out. We are, as at the end of December, 18 months into it. We'll be 2 years into it at the end of June. But it was a 4-year program. One of the big challenges we've got is adding to the workforce, and that is going to take time.
So how many of the 40 recommendations in He Ara Oranga have been fully implemented?
Well, they won't have been fully implemented, as I just said.
Any of them?
2019, the budget commitment was a 4-year program. So we
Yes,
started.
but any of them, Minister, I understand that, but have any of them been fully implemented?
They've all been started because you've got to start, and when you have a 4-year program, it's not completed. You get to the end of the 4 years.
So have you got a plan for implementation? I mean, is there actually a plan that people can read and make contributions to? And are you involving the sector in that?
Well, of the recommendations included a number of things, a lot of things, and including and adding additional services. One of the priority areas the report said was about those with mild to moderate mental health issues, so getting quick and ready access and easy access to help with that. That's what we've done. That's what we've started funding, as I say. It's a 4-year program to build up to it. We've started it. That's going well. We've also committed to upgrading or rebuilding acute mental health facilities which have been degraded for so long. So of 5 projects that have been approved out of the $235 million allocated for that, 4 are now in the design and construction phase. So that stuff is getting underway. We have a plan for each element of the He Ara Oranga report. I think the bigger question has been raised
Minister, where is that plan? Can people have access? Can they see it? Is it online? Because recommendations are one thing. A plan for implementation is totally different, isn't it?
So if you just let me finish up on your questions, I think we'll get there. So we are responding to the recommendations in the He Ara Oranga report. It is true that the outgoing Mental Health Commissioner has made the point about, in terms of the long-term plan, not fulfilling the recommendations, a long-term plan about mental health and a mental health strategy. That is not complete. That is being developed. The initial Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission made that point in their final report at the end of last year. That's an issue that would be picked up by the permanent Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission. It is a priority for them, but it's a priority for the Ministry of Health to continue the work to engage with the sector to put that plan together.
So should young children be waiting significant number of months, 4 months, and one listener has texted us to say 12 months in Taranaki, to wait to see qualified mental health staff in the public system? The alternative being, one clinical psychologist has said to pay $220 an hour for help. Other people have contacted us about eating disorder waiting times, saying that they literally have to be on death's door to get into those services. Should that be the case? Still?
No, it shouldn't be, and that was the very problem that was identified, back in the report a couple of years ago. That's why we put the extra money into it.
But it is still the case, Minister.
In doing the work, and you have to build a workforce. So creating a new clinical psychologist, creating a new psychiatrist, creating a new counsellor, that takes time to invest in people to take on that stuff. There's training we're doing with existing medically qualified people, nurses in particular, training them in mental health initiatives, but that still takes time. You have to make a start, and the problems that you identified, and indeed even the crises that were around 2 years ago, won't all have been alleviated in the 18 months that we've actually been putting money into the recommendations up to now.
So a lot of the things that we've just talked about are critical services, right? What about the focus in the report on prevention and going from a model of illness to wellness? What are you doing around that, promotion and prevention?
So of the $1.9 billion, nearly $900 million of that goes into other factors that are the determinants, the social determinants of mental health and wellbeing. So getting the employment right, the housing right, getting the support for families right. So there's money going into that as well. There's investment going into that. That is part of the plan as well. It has to be.
Going into it, but has it gone into it? What material difference is there around prevention and promotion services right now?
Well, of the money money that was going into that, the social determinants part of it, nearly $200 million has been spent on that part of it. So that stuff there is investment going into that. Should we expect it to, all the problems to have been cured within 18 months, nearly 2 years of starting the program? No, it's not. Is it still urgent? Absolutely it is. And are people still, struggling and suffering to get the help they need? Yes, they are. We've made the start. The work is underway. We still have got a ways to go, and it will still be the top priority for us to get that stuff done.
So what do you think the biggest problem is?
Well, we always knew the biggest problem was workforce. We had a workforce that was run down, diminished in numbers. We have to build that workforce up. We have to add to it, but you've got to do the training. And training in this whole sector, in the mental health sector, it is, it's not sort of block courses, and it's not 6-month courses. These are multi-year courses, and we have to build that workforce up.
But if there was a greater investment earlier in the piece in prevention, then arguably you might not have as much pressure at the end of the system in critical care.
Yeah, I guess, look, if you look at the starting point, we knew when the government took office at the end of 2019 that mental health was in a parlous state. We knew that from getting around, or I knew that from community contacts for the years leading up to that. We did effectively a stock take. The Heara Oranga report was actually a stock take of just how bad is it, what do we need to be doing. We got the message, and then we made our decisions based on that, on a good informed decision to get money into it. But that's the start of a process to rebuild in a system that has been run down over many, many years. And yeah, I'd like it to move faster. I wish it could. But you've got to move at a pace that that people can actually do, people can learn, people can get their qualifications, that we can develop and add to the new services, and that's what we're desperately trying to do.
How are you going to make sure that mental health transformation is not lost? Because we're living in a COVID world at the moment, and there are other major health reforms potentially coming down the pipeline. So how are you going to make sure and guarantee that this transformation of mental health services is not going to get lost in all of that?
Well, the money that we voted into it in 2019 is there. been voted for. It has to go into there. It's not going to be distracted or waylaid by anything else. I mean, COVID-19 is adding kind of new pressures and new issues in terms of our mental health services and treatment, new demands for people who are feeling isolated, people who are feeling anxious, and we've got to make sure that those services and treatment are there too. That's why we put on things like the 1737 phone service, and we started that, but that actually gets very busy because of COVID-19. So it's those sorts of things. We know that has to be there, but it won't. What we do in mental health won't be distracted by the rollout of the vaccination program for COVID-19 or other health reforms that we know we have to do.
So the recommendations in He Ara Oranga, does the buck stop with you? Are you the person that goes to Cabinet? Are you the person who agitates and pushes for all of these things to be implemented in the time frame? And if that doesn't happen, is that on you?
Yes, I get the reports in progress with He Ara Oranga, and I get the reports from the outgoing Mental Health Commissioner and the outgoing Initial Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission. I have all those reports. I'm dealing weekly with Ministry of Health officials on the progress of implementing the decisions that have already been made.
So generally speaking, why has there been no reporting on the performance of mental health services for the last 2 years? As I understand it, there used to be that annual report that was by Dr. John Crawshaw. Why is there no reporting now?
Look, I don't have an answer to that question on that. I understand that there was to be a change in the nature of the reporting, but I'll have to clarify exactly why a particular report that used to come out is no longer coming out. Because
the point around that and what professionals are telling us is no report, no baseline, no accountability. So where has it gone?
Well, I'm not sure that if one report hasn't come out, that means there's no report and no baseline and no accountability. The whole basis on which we made decisions where to put money as a result of He Ara Oranga is because we have data. We have data coming out our ears, and we know what the problems are. We've made decisions on where money needs to go, where the investments have to happen, the number of people that, extra positions that need to be trained up, what the services are that need to be in place that weren't there before, and all that work is happening.
Thanks for joining us. That is the Health Minister, Andrew Little. Latest child poverty stats show improvements were being made before COVID-19 hit, but officials warn any progress is now likely to have been undone by the pandemic. Figures released by Stats New Zealand for the year ended June 2020 only includes data gathered up until the March lockdown. The 9 different measures of child poverty all record an improvement on 2018, but Māori and Pacific children, as well as those with disabilities, continue to suffer disproportionately. Our social issues reporter Sarah Robson has the story.
Rachel and Michael are both working and have 3 daughters. But last year, in the midst of COVID-19, they found themselves struggling. They were among the thousands of people relying on food banks to feed their kids.
I felt it was embarrassing going to get food bank when we because we work and everything, but we just didn't have the money at the time.
Michael says they never thought they would be one of those families living in poverty.
Sometimes you see on Facebook or the TV program talking about people lining up for food because they couldn't, and I thought, how can they not be able to budget their money and make it through to the next payday or whatever? But when it happens to us, here I am thinking, sitting at home one time criticising these people. But, here I am lining up on the same line these people are lining up.
Child poverty estimates out today don't show the impact of the pandemic. That's because the numbers come from the Household Economics Survey, which had to stop collecting information when the country went into lockdown last March. What they do show is prior to COVID-19, child poverty was trending downwards across all 9 measures compared to 2018. There are 22,000 fewer children living in material hardship, where a child may have to go without essentials, and 45,000 fewer living in low-income households. The Children's Commissioner Andrew Beecroft says that's good news, but more action is needed.
If we're going to really hit child poverty on the head, we will need to have sustained, continuous, bold and ongoing packages and commitment. It can't be one-off, can't be tinkering around the edges.
The figures will include the impact of the government's $5 billion families package, which it hoped would lift up to 74,000 children out of poverty by this year. But since the pandemic, the number of people on the benefit has increased. More people have needed food grants from Work and Income, and the social housing waitlist has ballooned.
It's almost certain, beyond argument, that the situation is worse at the front line for families that are struggling than this. Food banks increasing. Everything we hear is that it's tougher.
Even before COVID-19, the statistics paint a bleak picture for Māori, Pacific and disabled children. Close to 20% of Māori and disabled children are living in material hardship, and the rate is even higher for Pacific children at 25%. Across all children, the figure is 11%. Māori Party co-leader Debbie Ngarua-Peka says the government must prioritise Māori.
Stop leaving us as the one plus, make us the priority, the vulnerabilities and the fact that we need help. Now, data can say what it wants, but what we're hearing on the ground, and certainly the advocates are, is that our whānau, our tamariki, are not getting enough support.
Janet McAllister from the Child Poverty Action Group says whānau with disabled children are really struggling.
That's because the income support here doesn't acknowledge properly the increased expenses that go with having to live with a disability.
In a post-election briefing, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was warned by officials the number of children living in poverty is expected to rise because of COVID-19, with material hardship rates expected to rise strongly. Ms Ardern says progress is being made, but has claimed she won't be satisfied until every child is lifted out of poverty.
We do have to pay particular attention to those who are on the very lowest incomes. We use measures to tell us those who are not just in poverty, but in deep entrenched poverty. So thinking about policies that will make the biggest difference to those groups, for me, will be next on the agenda.
Stats NZ says it doesn't have the ability to produce an interim report on the impact of COVID-19 on child poverty. That means the effects of the pandemic won't be seen until the next release in 2022. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
A man who's accusing a prominent businessman of fondling him in bed says he secretly recorded one of the man's associates trying to bribe him with $15,000. The accused, who has name suppression, is charged with 3 counts of indecent assault and 2 of perverting the course of justice. Jordan Bond has been in the High Court in Auckland, and a warning: some details in his report are distressing.
This complainant is the third to take the stand to accuse the businessman of indecent assault. He was staying at the prominent man's property and doing some work for him in 2016. He had food poisoning late one night and went to sleep in his room when he heard knocking at the door.
He then entered my room. I was thinking, okay, he's just going to help me settle into bed. And then was praying that he leaves. He then pulls the sheet, climbs over me and places himself against the wall. He then spoons me from behind and embraces me.
He said the accused started touching his penis and touching his body, saying, "Let me caress you."
And so I was able to elbow him from behind where he was, jab him, punch him, push him out of the way to get up out of the bed.
The accused left and the man started vomiting again, and he was taken to hospital. It was there he told a nurse what happened, who arranged for the police to speak with him early the next morning. The man never returned to the businessman's house, not even to get his clothes. 6 months later, as a result of this man's allegations, the businessman was charged. Shortly after, the complainant caught up with a mutual friend of both his and the accused's.
He started almost talking in riddles, or he was talking in code. I thought, okay, well, I think he might be trying to convince me to change my story. My intuition was you need to record this conversation because something's going to happen.
And here is part of the recording played to the jury today, recorded surreptitiously on his phone. In it, we hear a man talking about the complainant withdrawing, dissolving his allegation.
Dissolve it, get rid of it, let's get you started on this career, and let me hang some funds from at some point, which won't be hard. I can assure you of that. That's why get rid of yours, and I shall do the rest.
It appears the person in the recording offered the complainant access to a lawyer.
Well, you made the accusation, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, if you want to withdraw it, that's your job.
The word blackmail was mentioned in phrases like "things could come out" and "the people up there do crush people." The complainant said he felt threatened that there could be retaliation if he didn't withdraw the complaint. The Crown Prosecutor Simon Foote QC asked about a cheque mentioned during the secret recording.
And then when says, then that will clear and you can use it. What's he referring to there?
It's referring to a cheque. It was made out to me.
And how much was the cheque for?
$15,000.
What did he do with the cheque at this point of your conversation?
He put it on the table and slid it forward to me.
The accused sat silently in the dock. The trial before a jury in Justice Venning continues. Atuiti Koti Matua I Tamaki Makoto for Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
It's 27 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Facebook is restoring access to news content in Australia after apparently reaching a compromise with the federal government. The ban had come in response to proposed new media laws which would force Facebook to pay to show Australian news. The Australian government says the amendments clarify the law while also allowing for a fairer negotiation process for Facebook. The Australian Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, spoke a short time ago announcing that Facebook had refriended Australia. He says it's not a back down, but says it's a victory for his government.
Absolutely critically, the code maintains its key measures. Namely, it's a mandatory code, a world-leading code. Secondly, it's based on two-way value exchange. I want to thank Mark Zuckerberg for the constructive nature of the discussions that we have had over the course of recent days. It's been a difficult process, but these are really important issues. These are important issues because the purpose of the code and the purpose of the Morrison government's intentions have all along have been designed to sustain public interest journalism in this country.
And that was the Australian Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg there. NASA has released remarkable video and images from Mars taken by the rover Perseverance, which touched down on the red planet last week. They show the tense final minutes before landing in clouds of dust and grit being blown around. The BBC's Rebecca Morrell has the story.
The parachute has deployed.
From the release of a supersonic parachute to the shedding of a heat shield.
First look at the surface.
An out-of-this-world view Mars has never seen before. As the rover nears the surface, the dust is kicked up. Then a change of camera as Perseverance is lowered on ropes before touchdown.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars.
And the landing system is jettisoned away.
We can't test it on the Earth. So this is the first time we've had a chance as engineers to actually see what we designed. And I just can't, it's hard for me to express just how emotional it was and how exciting it was.
There are new still images too, a selfie of the rover and a vista of the alien world it now sits in, providing a glimpse of the terrain it's about to explore.
Now has radar lock on the ground.
This footage is already providing crucial information to scientists and they'll continue to study it as Perseverance gets to work. It's just a taste of what's to come.
And before we go, a last bit of feedback on our interview with the Health Minister, Andrew Little, and Mental Health Services. This person says the lack of access to treatment is appalling, the suffering is extreme and preventable. The Minister's assertion that things are improving is frankly ridiculous. Where is the data? How are they measuring it? They are not. The personal, social and financial cost is unacceptable. You can check out all our stories online. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. More than 700 COVID-19 tests have been carried out at Papatoetoe High School today after another student tested positive for the disease. Thousands of Auckland business owners have asked for the government's latest support package due to their loss of income during the latest lockdown. A pamphlet found at Spring Hill Jail encouraging protest to improve prisoners' living conditions has been referred to the police. Facebook has announced it will restore news content to its users in Australia. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It was kind of a lawless time. You could do whatever you liked. It was just about getting the silt out and getting people their houses back.
Lately with me, Karen.